The Senate pulls the plug on NPR and PBS in a late-night funding fight.
If you want to watch left-wing propaganda, turn on MSNBC. But the taxpayers should not be forced to subsidize it.
I'm Daily Wire Executive Editor John Bickley with Georgia Howe. It's Friday, July 18th, and this is Morning Wire.
Another top Biden aide pleads the fifth in a congressional hearing about the former president's competency. Will Jill Biden and Kamala Harris be subpoenaed?
Look, this isn't getting any better for the Bidens. This isn't going to go away for the Bidens.
And we talked to the president of the Chicago Fed about the upcoming interest rate vote and the feud between Trump and Powell.
Thanks for waking up with Morning Wire. Stay tuned. We have the news you need to know.
Hey guys, producer Brandon here. Are you tired of babysitting your grill, sweating over steaks, checking constantly only to serve beef jerky on one side and blood rare on the other? Those days are gone. I got a Chef IQ Sense and now I'm ready for the Food Network. This brilliant wireless cooking sensor is like a meat thermometer, but way smarter. Just stick it in whatever you're cooking, open the app, choose your protein, steak, chicken, fish, whatever, select exactly how you like it cooked, and Chef IQ Sense continuously monitors and predicts precisely when your food will be done. No more opening hot ovens or sweating over barbecues. You're free to kick back with guests while Chef IQ Sense sends alerts to your smartphone when your food is cooked to perfection, exactly the way you like it. This is the world's smartest, simplest to use wireless cooking sensor. And the best news is they just announced a flash sale. You got to jump on this. Don't miss out. Summer grilling season is here and Chef IQ Sense makes you a grilling master. And during their flash sale, you get 15% off. Visit chefiq.com and use promo code WIRE. Again, that's chefiq.com, promo code WIRE.
On Wednesday, the Senate narrowly passed a measure that would strip NPR and PBS of $1 billion+ in taxpayer funding.
Daily Wire's senior editor Cabot Phillips is here to break down the debate for us and what it means for the networks. Hey, Cabot, so a significant moment in Washington yesterday, years in the making. Get us up to speed.
Yeah, for decades now, Republicans have promised on the campaign trail to defund NPR and PBS, which they feel are essentially an apparatus of the Democratic Party and thus should not receive taxpayer funding. But in the past, whenever a vote has come up, Democrats vote against it. Republicans end up fracturing and not enough votes are there to actually do it. But this time around, President Trump made clear to Congress that this was a priority of his, and they followed through. Back in June, the White House formally requested that Congress rescind $1.1 billion in funding that had already been allocated for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They fund PBS and NPR. And early Thursday morning, after hours of debate over whether Trump should even have the authority to tell Congress how to spend money, the Senate voted 51-48 to approve the measure. It'll now head to the House for a final vote where it is expected to pass.
All right, so it's now in the hands of the House. So walk us through this debate. What have both sides said?
So Democrats say that PBS and NPR represent America's commitment to a free press and provide essential services for all people, particularly those in rural communities. They also argue that public broadcasting plays a significant role in emergency preparedness and community safety. Here's Democrat leader Chuck Schumer making that case from the Senate floor.
When a flood happens, when a tornado touches down, when a hurricane makes landfall, people need immediate, up-to-date alerts to stay safe. And sometimes, all too often, public broadcasting is the only way for people to hear what's going on. It's a matter of life and death.
And for their part, Republicans say that that's a ridiculous argument, given how many different ways people can now receive warnings about natural disasters and other emergencies. For more on that, I spoke with one of the biggest supporters of cutting funding, Tim Graham, host of Newsbusters at the Conservative Media Research Center.
All broadcasters are required to broadcast emergency alerts. And today, everybody's going to get emergency alerts on their cell phone. So the idea that you need NPR to learn of a flash flood alert, I mean, first of all, you have to assume that there's a huge number of people listening to NPR at 10 p.m. at night.
But look, more broadly, for Republicans, this issue comes down to political bias. It's not exactly a secret for anyone who has listened to NPR or watched PBS's political programming that they lean left. That's putting it lightly. Folks on the right say if these networks want public funding, they can't be advocating for one specific party. Here's Graham speaking to that bias.
Recently, we counted labels, how many times they use far right and far left, or variants of that, like extreme right, ultra conservative. And the PBS NewsHour really stood out because they had a ratio of 42-1. They used far right labels 42 times as often as they used far left. And the interesting thing here was that Donald Trump got elected with a Republican Congress. They could see the writing on the wall, and PBS and NPR made no attempt to move to the center, to try to be fairer, to try to be more balanced. If anything, they have doubled down in 2025. They were basically suggesting they didn't care what the Republican opinion was on their product.
42-1.
Yeah, it's staggering.
The numbers never lie, I guess. So what does this all mean for these outlets going forward?
So there is a chance they could again apply for more funding in the fall and recoup at least some of that money. But even without it, NPR and PBS will still survive. Taxpayer dollars currently account for less than half of their overall funding, but they'll certainly have to get leaner and rely on more private donations. Some Republicans say the move could actually result in their funding increasing because listeners and left-wing organizations will feel incentivized to support them with their own dollars, which folks on the right is a lot more palatable than taxpayer dollars.
Right, just so long as taxpayers aren't footing the bill for them. Cabot, thanks so much for reporting.
Absolutely.
America is built on hard work and powered by American energy. Chevron has spent $44 billion with local businesses across all 50 states since 2022, fueling infrastructure and communities, all while strengthening local economies. Last year, Chevron increased U.S. production nearly 20%, powering communities and businesses from the heartlands to the coasts. We're helping to fuel America's energy advantage, building a brighter future right here at home. Visit chevron.com/America to discover more.
Former First Lady Jill Biden's top aide testified to Congress on Wednesday. Anthony Bernal, who has been close to the Biden family since 2008, pleaded the fifth 7 times in response to investigators' questions.
Daily Wire reporter Tim Pierce is here to talk about the congressional investigation into former President Biden's fitness for office. So, Tim, what happened on Wednesday?
Well, a lot of refusing to answer. Bernal refused to answer a slate of questions around former President Biden's health, instead pleading the fifth. In legal jargon, pleading the fifth protects a person from self-incrimination. Bernal was a top trusted aide in the Biden White House. Jill often referred to him as her work husband. Here he is, sitting for questions in front of the House Oversight Committee.
Mr. Bernal, was President Joe Biden fit to exercise the duties of the president?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Bernal has invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Mr. Bernal, please be very clear. Are you declining to answer the question put to you solely on the ground that you believe the answer will incriminate you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
Mr. Bernal, did any unelected official or family member of President Joe Biden execute the duties of the presidency?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the question pursuant to my Fifth Amendment rights under the Constitution.
And it went on like that for a bit. That's the second time a White House official has pleaded the fifth in this investigation. Listeners will remember last week when Biden's White House doctor, Kevin O'Connor, refused to answer questions on his Fifth Amendment rights and doctor-patient privilege. There's a trend developing where top Biden aides refuse to answer questions on Biden's mental decline, and that's caused more than a bit of skepticism on the right. For his part, Bernal's attorney has said that his use of the Fifth Amendment should not be taken to be an admission of guilt. Worth noting that the story on Biden's health was covered on the right for years, but Democrats and the legacy media mostly ignored it until Biden's disastrous debate with President Trump blew up any pretense that Biden was mentally fit.
So who is Anthony Bernal and how much influence did he have in the administration?
A lot. During Biden's presidency, he served the First Lady as Chief of Staff. Here's Axios' Alex Thompson, who co-wrote a book on President Biden with CNN's Jake Tapper, talking about Bernal's influence on the Megyn Kelly show in May.
Then there's this other sort of group that aren't the Politburo, but are just as powerful. And they were the ones that kept the schedule, affected personnel, and really built the bubble. And that would be Annie Tomasini, who's Deputy Chief of Staff and previously Oval Office operations. And then Anthony Bernal, who was the top aide/enforcer for First Lady Jill Biden and had incredible influence to the point that even people in the Biden White House would refer to her as one of the most powerful First Ladies in history.
In their book, Original Sin, Thompson and Tapper described Bernal as a keeper of the flame, Biden's eyes and ears, a protector of myth. They went on to write, quote, "As we researched this book, it was difficult to find many Bernal defenders. He freely trash-talked senior, mid-level, and junior aides. Some described him as the worst person they had ever met."
Now, is there any way he can be compelled to speak?
Yeah, the Oversight Committee has an option here. They could compel testimony from Bernal and O'Connor by giving them immunity from prosecution. That would negate their need to invoke the Fifth. And Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer thinks there's more here. Here's his reaction to Bernal's testimony on Fox News.
You plead the Fifth to avoid self-incrimination. If he said under oath that Joe Biden was not in mental decline, then there's a very good likelihood that he's lying, and he knows he's lying, and that can be proven in a court of law that he's lying. That's why they're pleading the Fifth.
And potentially bearing the lead here, Comer also says he wants Jill Biden and former Vice President Kamala Harris to potentially testify in front of the committee.
Well, that would be a blockbuster. Tim, thanks for reporting.
Thanks for having me.
As President Trump ramps up pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell, the Fed is preparing for their big meeting at the end of the month to decide whether to cut the interest rate, as the president is demanding.
Joining us just before the Fed's communications blackout period is a man who will be in that meeting and has a crucial vote. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee. First, thank you so much for coming on.
You bet.
Now, we've just gotten the latest economic numbers that are looking pretty good. Things are holding steady in terms of inflation, up just maybe a tick. From your perspective, what are some of the key takeaways from the latest economic reports?
I thought with the inflation, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I've been heartened by the last 2 to 3 months. We got really mild readings, and I was hoping that maybe this is all there was going to be coming from tariffs. On the services and on the housing inflation, it's still looking pretty good, but on actual physical goods, in this report, you started to see, maybe tariffs are going to increase the prices a bit. So we were just a little wary. I'm still hopeful that we're in a pretty solid place on the economy. We've been growing. We've got close to full employment, but there were a couple of warning signs.
Now, we've had a very public feud between President Trump and Jerome Powell, the Fed chair. I'm interested in your perspective on what's taking place there. I don't know how much you can actually weigh in on this. Is this helpful, harmful, or do you guys just sort of tune this out in terms of your roles?
I'm not allowed. The rules of the Fed say that the members of the FOMC can only speak for themselves. I don't know what's going through anybody else's head or what the Fed thinks. It pains me seeing arguments about Fed and central bank independence. The reason that all the rich countries of the world have an independent central bank that's independent of political interference is precisely because if you look at places where they don't have central bank independence, inflation is higher, unemployment is higher, growth is worse. And we would not want to get in that circumstance. I don't know that that's what this is, but it makes me uneasy if we're going to get into an environment where people are literally questioning whether the Fed should be independent or should have to do what the administration is telling them when setting the interest rate.
What about the criticism coming the other direction from Trump? Can you say with confidence the Fed does operate independently and you're not thinking in terms of political calculations?
Yes. Look, all I will tell you is we release minutes and then eventually we will release word for word transcripts of, you can see for yourself what is on people's mind and what they're thinking about. And I think that it's imperative that when we make decisions about interest rates, it should be rooted in that dual mandate, stabilizing prices and maximizing employment. That's the critical element. It should be economic conditions that drive the decisions. And everybody should hold the Fed to that. And I think if you look at the minutes and transcripts, you can see that is what's on their mind.
Before we go, to put you on the spot here a little bit, do you expect to cut interest rates in the near future? Do you see that coming?
You know me, I don't like tying our hands before the meetings when we're still going to get a bunch of data. But I will say that before April 2nd, my view was we got pretty close to stable full employment. We got inflation trending down to 2%. And in an environment like that, I think rates can go down a fair bit more than from where they are today. And we got a little bit of kick up the dirt in the air aspect from extended policy changes that might kick us off of the path back to 2% inflation. But overall, I still think that what's under there could lead to rates to be fair bit lower, over the next year kind of time frame.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, especially before this blackout. We just got you in. We appreciate your perspective.
Yeah. Hey, it's a pleasure and anytime. I love talking to you.
That was Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee.
Thanks for waking up with us. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We'll be back later this evening with more news you need to know.